Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello listeners, I'm your speaker Casey and welcome to another episode of The Cult Vault. October is Black History Month and in light of this I've decided to release this episode. This week's episode is another instalment of an incredible freelance journalist talking through a deep dive of research on a subject that becomes closely linked with the cult worlds that we often speak about on this podcast. Releasing this episode was a difficult decision because the audio quality didn't turn out as well as we'd hoped. But the issues covered in this episode are so important and the information is so interesting that I decided I would go ahead and put this content out, but add this warning at the start of the episode. This week I speak with Joe. Joe is the creator of the Tennessee Independent Journal and has spent the last few months looking closely at an extremist group around the world, primarily based in America. Today's episode is on the Isupk. Not sure who this is? Listen closely as Joe goes through an independent report that he has pieced together on what could be labelled as a black supremacist movement. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you all that you can support my Patreon for as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/thecultvault. There are exclusive episodes waiting for you. But for now, here is Joe. So hello Joe, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me on my podcast this evening. I'm excited to get to listen to your independent journalistic wisdom. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit about who you are?
Sure. My name is Joe Schaefer. I'm an independent journalist. I specialize in asymmetric conflict and domestic radicalism in the U.S. I've been doing this for on and off for about 10 years now. So I'm fairly well versed in a lot of different stuff. I don't necessarily get into cults that often, but sometimes parallel lines end up crossing. So that's where we're at now.
And I think you're actually the host or the owner or creator of the Tennessee Independent website. Is that right?
Yes, I am the founder of the Tennessee Independent Journal. I am the chief photojournalist there. I don't like to say owner because it's kind of a collective thing that I've been trying to get going. But I'm the one paying all the bills right now, I guess. So.
Yeah, I was just having a look before we got together to talk, and there's some really interesting topics. Obviously, you're following the coronavirus on the website, and there's some articles on there about the Black Lives Matter protests that were going on, and it looks like you did follow the protesting across Tennessee quite closely.
Yes, that was pretty much my whole summer. I embedded with the journalists outside the state capitol for a few days. They protested there for 60 days straight, and I spent a couple nights there with them. And I've been following a lot of the smaller protests in smaller towns around Tennessee because they don't necessarily get the coverage that the protests of several thousand people will get. But in the grand scheme of things, they're probably more important because of the way voting breaks down in the state.
Right, and from what you've seen during your summer, has it been relatively peaceful? Has there been anything notable that you've witnessed whilst you've been out there?
Well, there was only violence one night in Tennessee. May 30th, the first night of the protests in Nashville, there was a riot, effectively, and some state buildings were damaged and some private businesses were damaged. But that was the only lasting damage that was done to any property in the state of Tennessee, as far as I'm aware, state property.
I think that's interesting because obviously that was at the very start when tensions and emotions were extremely high throughout what I could tell from over here in England, the entire country. Mm-hmm. So after that, it's almost like civilians took a step back and said, actually, we need to prove a point here and protest peacefully, which after that seemed to be pretty much what happened.
Right. And it's there. I mean, it's not to discount there hasn't been violence elsewhere in the country since then. But one thing that I found really interesting, the person that started the fire in the courthouse here in Nashville was not a Black Lives Matter protester. He was a member of a group called the Three Percenters, which are not necessarily white nationalists, but sovereign citizen kind of people who are anti-government and are predominantly white. And the person that was arrested and charged for that belonged to that group, not a Black Lives Matter protester.
That is interesting. That is. We also had something similar over here where we had statues of historic slave traders taken down and thrown into bodies of water across our country. And then we had a lot of white people standing, protecting statues that they thought people might try to tear down. And I'm pretty sure that most of the statues that they were standing around to protect were nothing to do with anything from the slave trade or anything that might be related back to the Black Lives Matter protests. So it's kind of almost like the white people against the white people over here towards the end of it. The message got completely lost in the UK. So it sounds as though it was highlighted much better over in America from what we could see anyway. Obviously the mainstream news wasn't giving us that information, but from what we could see on platforms like Reddit where people were sharing things live, and you know, a few friends that we have over in America who were also attending peaceful protests, it seems that there was some positive progress made in the outcome of everything that happened, which obviously was extremely tragic and never should have been a topic to protest in the first place. Which is interesting because we will probably be talking a lot about ethnicity and minority groups during our conversation today. So would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about the report that you've been working on that you sent over to me?
Yeah, sure. So I look at things through a slightly different lens than what's normally covered on your podcast. I look at things from an extremist lens, and I became aware of a group called the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, just kind of through the grapevine, because they're a part of the movement that I was looking into called the Black Hebrew Israelites, which actually have picked up some large name support since the protests began in May. Isupk has now declared that he is a member of Black Hebrew Israelites, as well as some athletes in the NBA and NFL. And that kind of perked my ears up, but I've been digging into different groups involved with this since late last year. So before all this, and then everything kind of came to a head, and they got thrust not to the forefront, but into a more mainstream line since then. So it's difficult to say where they fall as far as extremism, but from looking at their beliefs and how they treat their members, they are absolutely a cult. So that's why I'm here.
So you talked about starting this project at the end of last year. Obviously that was quite a while ago now. So has this been a bit of a rabbit hole for you? It
has. It's also very hard to find information openly because a lot of what I do is open source investigation, which lends itself to people voluntarily giving you information past a certain point. So I became aware of them, it's been years ago, became aware of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement when a man told me that I was a fake Israelite because I am Jewish. And that was kind of my introduction to this whole thing, but that's been years ago, and I kind of put it out of my mind until I saw him protesting last year, and I started digging into it from there.
So I believe that there through the conversations that we have had over email, that ISUPK is kind of like the shortened way to say it.
Yes, the ISUPK is the shortened way to say it because Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge is a bit of a mouthful.
It definitely is.
But it is an important thing to note that they are a subset inside of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. They are a single group under that umbrella.
Right. Groups. So this denomination has formed, and it's a bit more of a fringe movement than the one that it's branched off of.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
That's one way to look at it. Think of it almost like the way a species breakdown works, where you have group, order, all that. Black Hebrew Israelite would be the overall description for several groups that are not necessarily connected, but share a lot of the same baseline faiths.
Right. Yep. And can you tell us what the core beliefs and values are of this movement? Okay.
So to start, where do you even start with this one? That Black, Hispanic, and Native American people are the true descendants of the biblical Israelites, not anybody else. And they believe that they are superior because of that. And they also believe that white people, Asians, and Black African people are agents of the devil that have been set out to oppress them as they see themselves as the children of God, so to speak. And they feel that they were enslaved because they strayed from the teachings of God, and that's how they ended up becoming enslaved in the New World.
And is it common for this message to be preached within Tennessee, or is it throughout the US, or is it worldwide even?
They are actually, they're worldwide.
Right.
The ISUPK, they have at least 30 schools in the US. They have schools in Caribbean countries. I believe they have one or two in South America. They have a UK program. I'm not sure where. I assume it's based in London, but I have not been able to find any specific details about where that school actually is.
Okay.
They're a large group. They claim to have tens of thousands of members. I haven't been able to verify that, so I'm not going to lend much credence to it. I find it hard to believe the group that size is able to maintain the level of anonymity that they have.
Right.
Because outside of what they want you to see, there's not much out there.
So if they're operating in so many different countries in so many different parts of the world, they must have been an established movement for quite some time now. Do you have any idea of how and when this movement began its operation? Yeah, according to their whole history that they put out publicly, it was founded at 1 West 125th Street in Harlem, New York in 1969. That's kind of a big year as far as race relations in the U.S. goes. The Black Panthers were very active around that time. They started their school lunch or breakfast program on the West Coast that year. And coming out of 68, when you had all the student protests in Paris and all the protests in the U.S. and the anti-war movement was really coming into its own,
it's not surprising to see a group like this stem from that period of time.
Okay, and if this is a denomination of something, as you mentioned before, of something else, is there an idea of where that original movement came from?
As best as anybody's able to tell, and I reached out to a couple of religious historians about this. It started in what's a period called the American Revivalist movement, which is the late 19th century into the early 20th century. There was two different guys, Frank Cherry and one other person. They had complementary visions claiming that that African Americans were the true descendants of the Israelites, and they went around proselytizing in the U.S. for many, many years on that, and eventually they started a couple different congregations under that banner, and I don't believe that those original congregations exist anymore, but it stemmed different small movements on and on until the late 60s when the Isupk, who is by far the largest.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Denomination got their foothold.
Right. Okay. And this particular branch, the ISUPK, do they have a single leader, or is it sort of like the Jehovah's Witnesses where they have like an overall, hierarchy system of different people in charge?
They have a kind of a confusing rank structure that I haven't been able to fully unravel yet, but there is a single central leader. His name is Commanding General Yohana, and he is in the Upper Darby School, which is just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's where the group's based out of now. He also has a board of generals that he kind of confers with, but he is the final authority on everything
right.
As far as I can tell, and what they say.
And is he often the face that you can see protesting, leading services for his group?
Yes. If you go to the actual ISUPK website, isupk.com, a vast majority of the imagery and videos and stuff, he is going to be in it. If he's not the main focus, he will be in it at some level, because it's his word is the message of the church at this point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So he is. Yeah. As you said, he is the final word. And is the internet and this type of proselytizing online, is that the main way that they spread their message? How do they recruit new members?
They have a couple different things they will use for recruiting. The internet's certainly been a boon for them and any other fringe group, because it gives you an equal playing field with any group, really. They also do street preaching, which is they set up a small portable PA system. Looks like a lot of times there's a stage and posters and everything else, and they stand out on a street corner and preach the same as they would going all the way back to their beginnings. They also have prison outreach programs and community outreach programs, which they're apparently fairly shy to talk about. But I know they do have inmate outreach programs, and from what I've seen, at least one of the teachers in the group here in the Nashville school is a former inmate. So they're kind of recruiting from all the places any traditional religion would recruit, except for they don't have, necessarily a church you go to. For them, it's on Saturdays for Sabbath. So there's a lot of different avenues, and it's hard to determine what's effective for them right now.
I remember reading a quote from your report that says that they call themselves a parish without a church. So
Right.
as you just mentioned then, they don't actually have any particular buildings that they congregate to.
Well, they have schoolhouses, but they don't hold like formal services like they would at a synagogue or for a Christian church of that type.
Okay, and when you mention the schools, are they is it education in the traditional sense? They have children of a certain age attending.
It's integrated a lot. They have religious classes, and they also have what would effectively be sermons. And it seems kind of mixed. I think they have classes that are more directed towards young people and new members, and then they have more advanced classes, which would obviously be adults and people that have been in the faith longer.
Right,
So,
okay. So if you were a child being brought up in the ISUPK, are you also attending a traditional school where you are getting a full education, or are you just in these schools where it's mixed with adults as well?
as far as I know, they would still attend a regular school during the day, and then at night they would go to the ISUPK school for their religious education.
Right, okay.
A
So
lot of times here in the US, though, what you see is homeschooling with these kinds of groups because they don't necessarily want their kids interacting with the wider world.
yeah. And you spoke about the preaching on street corners using the internet, and I read something in your report about shock value and how the ISUPK use this to their advantage when they're on these street corners preaching their word. Can you talk a little bit about how that is achieved?
Yeah. So it's basically they go out onto a street corner and spew what I would call hate speech. You know, it's one of General Yohana's favorite lines is "God damn the white man." So they'll use that to kind of for shock value because you hear somebody yelling that into a PA system on the street, it's going to get your attention. And so you'll see that kind of stuff draws a crowd, and you're not going to get everybody in that crowd, and they recognize that. But if they can get one person out of that crowd, if they can get one person even slightly interested, that's a success to them, I'd imagine. So, and it's, you know, and I've sat through 40, 50 hours of their videos now, which are just teachings that they've done. And they acknowledge that you're not going to be able to save everybody or convert everybody to their faith, which they call the truth. But if you can save just one, you're doing your job with them.
Okay, and when they talk about not being able to save everybody, are they talking about just people of color, or are they talking about, you know, white people, Jewish people such as yourself included in that ranking?
They're only concerned with people of color. As far as they're concerned, they are waiting for the apocalypse to come back around so they can re-enslave white people and Jewish people and Asians and anybody that does not fall into their very specific scope of what is the chosen people.
Right, okay. And it also mentions in your report the ISUPK troopers. Are they different from the Leaders Board of Generals?
The troopers act more or less as security and foot soldiers. They say they're not foot soldiers. I have to take them at their word because there's no report of them doing violence. But they dress in all black and act as security. When you go into an ISUPK school, if you're not a member, you're searched by troopers. They stand outside and make sure nobody comes in that is not supposed to be there. And it's kind of something you can become from any point inside the organization. If you, they have announcements at the end of their teachings, and it says if you wish to become a trooper, dress in all black and show up for training effectively.
Right. Okay. So that's quite similar to the Black Panthers in that way then.
Right. It's, if you look as far as their social organization and the way the group's structured, if you remove the religious element from it, they seem to borrow a lot from the Black Panthers and other groups from the period that are maybe a little bit older. They seem to draw a lot of influence from that.
Which is definitely interesting considering that the denomination came about around about the same time.
Right.
And you mentioned before with the shock value being used to the advantage of the ISUPK, something in your report about white actors being used to reinforce the message of the people preaching. Can you kind of just talk us through that a little bit?
Sure. And actually, I meant to send you a link to that video, and I'll send it to you now.
Oh, yes, please.
So what the story is that they were out street preaching. I believe it was in New York City. And two young white people came up and kissed the feet of the ISUPK preacher to show their subservient, basically.
And it's alleged that these people were paid to do that.
It's a lot of people say that they were paid. The ISUPK obviously maintains they were not. Obviously, the ISUPK maintains they're not paid actors. It's hard to say either way. I'm inclined to believe that they are personally, but I have nothing to back that up.
It would be interesting for somebody to go and do that if they were a white person, specifically because...
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Kissing the feet of the person preaching doesn't necessarily mean anything good for you, because as we've already discussed, you know, you wouldn't be accepted into their kingdom of heaven.
Right.
If you didn't fit within their
view of what is supposed to be. It's you're not gaining anything by doing it. And it's it's Chicago, Illinois that happened. But it's hard to say what motivation anybody would have to do that, besides, you know, the whole joke of proving how woke you are. And
right, yes, of course. Yeah, I didn't think about that side of it. Yeah.
So that's kind of, but it's just, even then it doesn't, I find that extremely difficult to believe. So.
And it doesn't just end there with the shock value of things. They're often being seen using billboards outside of abortion clinics, is that right?
When they go out and do their street preaching, a lot of times they'll have kind of poster boards or small, or not necessarily small, but signs made up and set up that have pictures of like aborted fetuses and stuff on them, and claim that Planned Parenthood is a genocide against the chosen people.
Right.
That it's a genocide against racial minorities in America. And I can see how that line's drawn, if I'm completely honest. And that's kind of where this group and a lot of different cults and extremist groups pull you in. There's a kernel of truth in a lot of things they say. And then they can weave this whole narrative around it, and before you know it, you're swallowed up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, any rational person that is approached by somebody who has these messages has to be approached with some level of something that comes across as rational to them first, before, the extra layers of things that may seem a little bit out there for people at first start to become part of their daily narrative. So it's kind of like something that's built upon, isn't it? So I do understand exactly what you mean there. But you also said something about racial minorities in America. And it's interesting that they would talk about Planned Parenthood being a sin when I think I don't know what the statistics are. I'm not sure if you've looked at them, but it could be predominantly white people that are going to Planned Parenthood. So why would they see that as such an issue?
I'm not sure what the statistics are. And it's a lot of clouding around those statistics. I would not be surprised if it is disproportionately minorities that use those services. I can say that at least here in Nashville, the Planned Parenthood clinic is in a vastly minority neighborhood.
Right. And do you think that's due to financial reasons?
I'm not sure, honestly. Planned Parenthood here in the U.S. has been pretty continually attacked by the right for the last 20 years as far as the budget goes. So it could be budgetary reasons that they're having to be in neighborhoods like that where it is just statistically cheaper to rent land.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting that we both came to the same conclusion that despite this being almost like a Black supremacist group, preaching about Planned Parenthood, being a sin, is very similar to what predominantly white Christian groups also do across different parts of America.
Right.
Is that something when as you were going through, is that a common theme you found?
There's a lot of threads that are not especially unique to the group. A lot of what they preach falls in line with almost any fundamentalist Christian group or fundamentalist Orthodox Jewish group to some extent. And then it's kind of changed and molded to fit their narrative of Black supremacy. But as far as what a lot of their teachings and stuff, it's just literal teachings of the word of the Bible.
So they do use the Bible as a basis for their preaching.
Yeah. They use the King James Bible. They strongly recommend the 1611 version because it has some additional books in it that are not in other versions. And they kind of lean on that, but what's interesting about it is they teach almost exclusively out of the Old Testament in that version of the Bible.
Okay. And do they interpret scripture in a way that's different to other mainstream religions? Yes.
One example, I believe it's in the report, is even the 10 Commandments: don't bear false witness against your neighbor. To them, your neighbor is only somebody in the faith. So it's perfectly fine to bear a false witness against somebody that is not Black, Native American, or Hispanic.
Right. So even if your neighbor happened to be a white person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's interesting because I suppose it's a difficult topic to speak about and be mindful and politically correct, because if we were to reverse this and have the same conversation, we'd be classed as racists.
Oh yeah.
But it's difficult to have the same conversation and make sure that we're not crossing those boundaries. Do you understand what I mean?
That's my biggest concern when I, speaking to you and writing a report, is not coming off as just horrendously racist, because that's absolutely not my intent.
No, of course. And the only reason I keep saying, oh, well, if you're white is because as a white person,
Right.
I'm not eligible to join the ISUPK, even if I was to agree and believe in everything that they are preaching and everything that they are teaching to the world and their members. Because of my skin color, I cannot be a part of that movement. So that's the only reason why, just to clear that up for any of the listeners, that is the only reason why I keep going back to white. I am myself, I'm white. I suppose I could use, other ethnicities outside of, Black, Hispanic, or Native American as examples. But I guess I keep just drawing parallels back to myself. So I just wanted to clear that up.
Right. And yeah, it's hard. It's a hard subject, and I think they've kind of thrived on that for a while. Is it's almost taboo to talk about a Black group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you think
you're gonna get blasted for being racist, even if you're not? Like, I am fully prepared for the fallout that's going to come from this. There's going to be a hellacious amount of blowback on me, calling me racist for this report.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously with you being Jewish, being told that, everything that you've been taught and everything that you've practiced with yourself growing up, I'm not sure how involved you are with your faith, but you were approached and almost had your spirituality attacked before you decided to do this report, and that's what piqued your interest in the first place. So it is interesting, and it definitely is difficult to talk about. And I wonder why, if that's the reason why such little attention has been brought to this group so far.
Yeah.
When obviously, going by the numbers that they have and the places that they're operating in, they seem to be picking up a lot of traction.
Yeah. It's I think it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic about how they've managed to fly under the radar for as long as they have. Even comparatively speaking, there's over 300 million people in the US. So even being generous and saying they have 30,000 people, it's still an extreme minority in the US.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
There are groups larger than that I'm sure I don't know the name of. But the other thing is they've managed to operate under the radar for so long because a lot of how they operate is very decentralized. They have a central leadership core, and that person determines the direction. But as far as operation goes, the schools seem to be relatively independent. You can even see this in how they present themselves online. It's kind of scattershot trying to find different groups or different schools broadcasting online. A lot of them do, but it's not they broadcast online on this platform. Like the Nashville school uses Facebook Live to broadcast their classes out.
Okay, yeah.
But I think it's the North Carolina school uses a service called Periscope, which honestly I didn't even know was still active. So it's kind of hard to determine how much they're doing behind closed doors in something like a private Discord server or Telegram group or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, if they're operating in different parts of the world as well, I mentioned before, like a hierarchy system with the Jehovah's Witnesses. There must be something like that in place, because although there's one person in Philadelphia who is seen as, as the person at the top of this movement and the person who, whose word is law, he can't be over in England. We're in a different time zone over here. So I wonder how that works, how that trickles down, and you know, if they operate differently over here than they do, you know, in those parts of America.
I would assume that they operate a little bit differently. I think that the board of generals, or whatever he calls them, I think that they're kind of regional leaders, and I think that what he says trickles down through them. It seems to be that it is kind of just a regular corporate hierarchical structure for most of it, but it starts to get kind of convoluted down at the individual school level, where you have officers and you have priests and troopers and then regular members, and how that stuff is broken down and where each person falls in that kind of structure. That's kind of where it breaks down for me as far as what is actually who falls where, so to speak, like who's in charge of what.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible that where these new congregations have started in different countries, people have moved from the central organization to these different countries with the view of starting these groups. I know that's often how some movements expand. You know, they'll send experienced people who are very aware of the rhetoric that the group uses, and they will take that message and they will move to different countries to implement that message and that rhetoric somewhere else in the world. So it could be that these groups are being led by people that were very close members to the, you know, the center of the movement before moving away to implement these groups elsewhere. But I guess we don't really know for sure.
It's hard to say. I don't think the ISUPK is interested. They're obviously they're interested in spreading the message pretty widely. But one of the things a lot of the Black Hebrew Israelite groups move to do is effectively retake Israel. And there are stories from other subsets under the Black Hebrew Israelite banner effectively trafficking people to Israel. And I can't say whether the ISUPK is involved with something like that, but I would be very surprised if they are. They seem to be much more interested in taking control of the New World when that time comes. So I think that what they relied on as far as spreading their message wide is either touching with that one person that's very motivated to spread the word in their location, or perhaps sending people abroad on a missionary type trip to spread their word.
Yeah. I mean, that would...
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? I kind of like the high five, but if you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. At ChumbaCasino.com, choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Makes sense from the perspective of things I've read and research I've done on other movements, but obviously we don't know for sure if that's the reason why. But another thing I read in your report is that they don't just use the internet for spreading their message. They have a website that helps them with online clothing as well.
Yeah, they have kind of a whole microeconomy surrounding the religion. It's interesting. I'm kind of waiting to see how it played out, because in the report I mentioned they use PayPal for a lot of their payment processing.
Yes.
On their different websites, including collecting donations and tithes. So I sent a message to PayPal's media relations department asking how they justify this, because in June their whole board of directors and CEO came out with this anti-racist campaign. And the response I got back from PayPal is, we'll look into it and get back to you. And that was several weeks ago now. It'll be several more weeks by the time this airs, I'm sure. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's that topic before that we were coming back to, from, that they are spreading, what if messages that if yourself and I were spreading would be seen as racist, but can we apply that same terminology to this group without being racist ourselves? And would PayPal be seen as being a racist organization if they were to shut down this fundraising platform?
Well, they're in a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation.
Yes.
Because they've deplatformed a lot of white nationalists in the US. They've deplatformed a lot of people that are not quite to the level of being called white nationalists, but are extremely right wing. So if they're willing to do it to them, fair is fair, they should be willing to do it to this group as well. But there's a lot of backlash to doing it to a minority focused group.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
they're in a tough spot, and I don't feel bad at all for putting them there. But
it's what journalists do. You go into this organization and you're asking them for a comment on something that you are genuinely interested in. So in terms of PayPal being a platform for them to raise money, do you know if people have to pay to attend these schools as well?
They expect tithing in the biblical sense, which is 10% of everything you make.
Right.
And they also, it seems they expect women to put in some work as far as making clothing and different ceremonial.
Yeah, I was definitely going to come to the
whether and men
the women's side of things.
Men are expected to attend something called camp, and which seems to be kind of a retreat situation, where they go and they do teachings and all kinds of different stuff. It looks like it happens once or twice a year, but it's there is a monetary element to it. Somebody's getting rich. I don't know who, and if they are getting rich, it's very interesting how they're doing it, judging by their IRS forms. So I don't think there's a ton of money in the group, if I'm honest. But
no, you
there's
did
a
mention
lot more than they're saying there is.
You said in your report that for something that's so big and claims to have so many numbers, there's no official record that says exactly how much money the group has made. I mean, are they classed as having an official charitable status?
They are. They're a 501c3 charity.
Right, so they're completely tax exempt.
Mm-hmm.
And so why is there... So with the IRS, they still have to declare how much they're receiving in donations and fundraising? In
theory, yes. The IRS for small charities has a form called the 990N, which is literally the size of a postcard if you manage to find one of the old paper ones. And all it does is say that we collected less than $50,000 in receivable donations over the last 12 months. And they have filled one of those out every year since 2007.
That says that they have not been given any more than 50,000
in receivable donations, correct?
And yet the schools are still running. And you said there's how many of them across America?
At least 30.
Right, and they're operating in different parts of the world. I'm not sure if financially it works the same way, but so they haven't received any more than 50,000 in donations each year, despite operating at least 30 schools and having the online clothing shop.
At least one online clothing shop. They also have a shop that sells essential oils and incense, and there's all kinds of stuff.
And obviously there could just be donations in general going through the PayPal site from, one person sitting at home on their laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. And also something that you noted about the IRS is that it's actually listed under a different person's name to the man that is seen as the leader of this movement.
It is. It is listed, the principal officer to the IRS is listed as Dr. Holly, who is a therapist in Philadelphia. She is listed, Dr. Holly Sawyer is listed as the principal officer of the IRS, not General Yohana. I've talked to a couple of different lawyers about this, and they said likely what it is she is involved with somebody that's high up in the group, and she is either a respectable face to the government or she's the fall person.
Yeah. So if ISUPK was ever to become financially accountable, it would actually come down to her as opposed to the man leading the group.
Correct. It would fall on her instead of General Yohana since she's the principal officer.
Okay.
So it's possible that she is just the fall person, but she runs a relatively respectable psychological practice in Philadelphia, and she self-published a few books at least.
So this Dr. Holly Sawyer and General Yohana, they're both in Philadelphia together, so it could be a reasonable explanation that she is maybe romantically involved with somebody who is close to General Yohana.
It's a reasonable explanation. I would go as far as to say it's likely, just because of the level of involvement she's had with the group over the years. I would not be surprised to find out that she's married to either General Yohana or somebody else high up in the group that is in that upper Darby school.
Right. And you mentioned before that it could be because she's seen as a respectable person within sort of the eyes of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. And even if it turned out that she was married to General Yohana, maybe he has more than one wife.
Oh, that's a very real possibility. The group does endorse male-dominated polygamy, or plural marriage, however you want to define it, where effectively, under the biblical terms, a man can have multiple wives. They claim that they have a religious basis for this. No one else has really adopted this anymore. The last large group that this was considered acceptable was probably the Mormon Church, over 100 years ago.
Yeah, I've written that down here as well, because male-dominated polygamy is not something that is characteristically unique to the ISUPK movement.
No, not at all. It's pretty common throughout a lot of male-dominated cults, it seems, where it's multiple partners is perfectly acceptable for a man, but a woman needs to remain faithful to her husband, so to speak.
And there were some other things that you spoke about as well in terms of the patriarchy of this movement and how dominant the men actually are towards the women and what is expected of females in their roles within the ISUPK. So can you just talk us through, obviously this is a little bit angering for me, especially when I read through the report, but just entertain our listeners and talk them through that a little bit.
So one of the big things I noticed is basically a biblical level of subservience for women to men. If you're not attending one of their classes in person and you check in online and you're a woman, you are to declare your name, property of, your husband's name, and then his rank in the organization. So they effectively want women to believe that they are property and not people. They are raising women and girls to be second-class citizens to their husbands, fathers, whatever the dominant male person is in their life.
And this isn't done through suggestive rhetoric. This is done through plain, open preaching.
Oh yeah, it's hardline preaching. It says here in the Bible that a woman is to be subservient to her husband.
Right.
So, and that's the line they take. And it's appalling in a modern society. It's, not something that many people are going to agree with, but it lends them a level of power within their organization that kind of puts them beyond question. So when they do something like take a second wife, you don't have any say in the matter.
Right.
So.
And do you know what their thoughts and feelings are around things like premarital sex?
It's okay for women or for men, but not for women. A man can be with any woman as long as it's not another man's wife, and that extends beyond the people they view in the truth. So they could not come and be with my wife. That would still be a sin for them. But as long as it's an unmarried woman, it's perfectly acceptable to be with them. But the catch-22 is, if you lay with a woman in the biblical sense, she becomes your wife automatically. So that's kind of how they get around that.
Right. So there aren't necessarily traditional marriage ceremonies taking place. It's the act of sexual intercourse that is unifying these two people in marriage.
I believe that they do still have traditional marriage ceremonies for a majority of their members, but it's kind of the catch-22 to get around premarital sex for them is to say that, oh, well, now you're my wife. So it wasn't really premarital sex because now we're married.
Okay. And I mean, it's a barbaric question to ask, but do you know if they have age restrictions on when they start to marry women to men, if the women have no say or choice?
I don't have any hard evidence to back this up, but I suspect that they treat this in the biblical sense where you become a woman when you begin to menstruate. So
right.
It's theoretical, but it's possible that there is underage marriages going on, but I can't say for sure whether
right.
That's
yeah. I mean, it would be a sensible conclusion to draw, seeing as they seem to be following every other biblical aspect so closely, despite interpreting the scripture to sort of fit their own beliefs. And
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
I know that we've spoken a little bit about how the men treat the women and how the women are seen. And I'm guessing that things like homosexuality and the LGBT community have no place within this movement.
No, it's I've heard at least one preacher, teacher, whatever you want to call the person leading the class, say that they should be killed, that they should be stoned. They equate homosexuality, transsexual, anything in that kind of end of the spectrum, they equate it to pedophilia. They see no difference, and they effectively say that anyone that is gay is a pedophile.
Right. So they do recognize pedophilia within their movement. Obviously, even that perspective to have in this day and age is insane for me to get my head around, because I feel like in my generation, especially in the area I live in, you know, you could be a man with a long beard and a full face of makeup and women's clothing and walk down the street and nobody would turn a blind eye.
Right.
So it's so strange for me to hear the perspective that this group has around women and the LGBT community group. It's almost as if they are, you know, 100 years in the past.
Right.
And it's like you said in your report, it seems to be that they are very similar to a lot of Christian groups, whether they're practicing mainstream Christianity or you know, have fringe beliefs of Christianity. The only thing that sets them aside from the rest of the practicing religions is the fact that they believe that the people of color, Hispanic people, and Native Americans are the only ones that are going to be saved, that can be saved.
Right.
That is the only thing that seems to set them apart from other religions.
Mm-hmm. And it's and that's very well said. I've talked to a couple people that were in, I don't want to call it a fringe religious group, but it's a very hardline religious group called Seventh-day Adventists. And I spoke to a couple former members of that group, and they said that, yeah, it's what they believe is what we learned on Sundays. So
yeah. I just finished a series on the Branch Davidians, so I've been able to do a little bit of research on Seventh-day Adventists, and I completely agree with what you said about not quite being a fringe movement, but you know, not obviously not fitting within the mainstream umbrella of religion either. And ISUPK claim to be non-violent, but then speak about how, you know, people of a certain sexuality deserve to be stoned to death.
Right. They claim to be a non-violent group. I don't have any evidence to prove to the contrary. One thing that was kind of pointed to them was a shooting of a kosher grocery store in Jersey City, New Jersey. I believe it was in 2019. And it ended up being nobody affiliated with the group. And a lot of people ended up having to walk back statements they made immediately after. But General Yohana went on a local news station and did a pretty long interview, about 20 minutes, saying that the people that committed this crime were not members of the ISUPK, and if they had come to an ISUPK school, they would have learned to do exactly the opposite of what they did. And I don't have any evidence to the contrary. So if there is actively violence within the group, it stays internal.
But they do believe in carrying a weapon, is that right?
Yeah, they believe in carrying firearms and weapons and for self-defense, which, if I'm being perfectly frank, I completely understand as a minority in the U.S. wanting to be protected. Where I kind of raise an eyebrow, though, is the fact that they have a camp coming up in October, and one of the things on the agenda for their camp is weapons training.
Right.
So that kind of raises an eyebrow. That goes beyond personal defense.
So weapons training sounds a little bit different to, you know, an afternoon at the shooting range.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be an afternoon at the shooting range because, I mean, it's Texas. So it could be something that simple, or it could be something more. I can't say. But as it sits right now, I find it hard to believe that you're going to dedicate a whole day of your 4-day camp to weapons training and it just be proper handling of a handgun.
Right. So even though this movement believes in bearing arms, there's no evidence to suggest that they are violent in any way.
As of now, I have not found anything that I could say unequivocally links them to violence.
Okay. And I just wanted to go back here because I've written Dr. Holly Sawyer's name down, and I just wanted to make the point that you mentioned in your report that, interestingly, she is a person of color herself, but she is also a woman. So it's interesting that this group that is so patriarchal in its views would allow a woman to have such authority and status over the entire financial records for this movement.
Right. And that's kind of, and, you know, bringing the whole thing together, that's kind of why the attorneys I asked and spoke with about this, they said that she's most likely a fall person, because there's no way that a group like this is going to turn over the reins of financial responsibility to a woman with everything that they believe.
Right.
So it's a mind-boggling situation. It's either nobody at the top believes what they're saying, or they believe what they're saying so much that they've insulated themselves legally from the one real repercussion in the U.S., which is tax fraud.
Yes, that is definitely. It would be interesting to find out what the answer is to that question, but
well, they don't want to talk to me, so
yeah, I've definitely made a note to speak about that as well. But another point that you made is that it is common for extremist groups to have doomsday or end times prophecies, and that is another thing that is common within ISUPK.
yeah, they say that we're living at the beginning of the end times, which in 2020 it's kind of hard to argue with that view. But where it becomes concerning with this group is, where do you draw the line as you believe there's a great war coming, biblically speaking?
Yep.
When do you say, okay, it's time to go get these weapons I've been trained to use and use them? So that's kind of my big concern with it at the moment is, when does that day come? Because if Johanna is able to keep the group under control and nonviolent, eventually he's not going to be in charge anymore. And next person in line may not be practice nonviolence at this time, because they may be put into that position and believe this is the end times, let's jumpstart this holy war. So that's where I'm at with it as far as them being an extremist group. They're not an extremist group right now, but they're a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I mean, you've had the extremely political and social atmosphere in your country this year. I mean, politically, when isn't there a tense atmosphere in America? But you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of the protests, people panic buying with the COVID-19 virus. When is one of these occurrences going to be?
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1, go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2, collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3, play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games, all for free?
Step 4, unleash your excitement.
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
One thing too many that causes people to panic so much into taking some kind of action. And it could be any extremist group at this point. You know, there are unfortunately hundreds of different movements that preach about end time prophecies and the end of the world and being the only group that will be saved and being the only group that is worthy of being saved. And I'm guessing that when the ISUPK talk about doomsday and the end of the world and being able to save people, again, they are talking about people of color, Hispanic and Native Americans, which is which is interesting, because just going back to the Jehovah's Witnesses again, you know, they have their own prophecies of the end times. Somebody I interviewed recently said that there's this joke that goes around within the Jehovah's Witnesses that this is the end times of the end times, because they've been saying that it's the end times for so long. Do they have an idea, the ISUPK, of when they expect the world to end?
I don't think they do, because all the classes I've sat through, well, I haven't sat in on the classes, but I've watched. One of the big themes is God's going to come back when you least expect it. So it's interesting to me that they're going to say that, but then the next class will say that we are living in the end times.
Right.
So when is he coming back? Versus now's the time, and it becomes, there could be somebody that self-declares, well, I'm Jesus returned, and it's time to kick off this holy war, and they fall in line with it. Or it could be one of those things where, you know, they do what the Jehovah's Witnesses do and say it's the end times for the next hour long.
Yeah.
It can cut either way.
I think whichever way it's cut, it's still instilling a level of fear into people that essentially, you know, encourages them to act in a way that their movement wants them to.
Mm-hmm.
And we've spoken a little bit about the schools that they run. And in your report, there was a section that you wrote about all ages and genders attending the same law schools. And there was one significant moment within that report that particularly stood out to me around the integration of different age groups, when one man addressing a class was talking about lynching.
Mm-hmm. That was in July, actually on July 4th. There was an incident involving a gentleman named Box Booker here in the U.S. where he was held up against a tree by several white men for supposedly trespassing on their land. And the teacher, Officer Nishak Maithon, was talking to the class about this, and he said that they were holding him up against that tree, and somebody said, go get a rope. They intended to lynch him. And there was a child in the class. They don't show the child on the video because they focus on the instructor. But judging by the voice, it sounds to be a little boy about my son's age. So I would say between 7 and 9 years old, that asks what a lynching is. And Officer Mindfat explains in pretty grisly detail what a lynching is to a child, and then tops it off by using baby talk to explain that when you die, all the poo-poo comes out.
Right, which is...
It's just mind-blowing to talk to a child that way in that context. And
absolutely, yeah. It was quite harrowing to read that part of the report, actually.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, there's so much that I left out in that report, that because I focus more on extremism than the cult aspect, but there's a lot of cult elements to the group that were left out of the report, like how they treat new members. I'm going to call them initiates. I don't think they call them that, but new members, as far as their social restrictions and stuff.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
When you come into the group and how they handle marriage and stuff like that, it's just it's horrifying in a lot of ways.
And I guess that's where some of the more cult-like methods of control would come from. If you were to write a report that focused less on the extremist behavior of the group and more of the methods of control and manipulation that are being used against their members, the report would probably be it would take a completely different direction. But you know, it would probably be the same in length because you would have enough material to write about that.
Right, and it's to cover both sides in depth. You end up with a 20-page report that nobody but people that are gluttons for punishment like me are going to read. And it's hard to try to condense it down because it's the copy text you got was just over 5 pages single space.
Yeah, I was really surprised actually that when it came through that it was as long as it was, because I was expecting it to be sort of 20 to 30 pages. I was thinking if you wanted to, you could have made it, you know, so long. It must have been quite a job actually just to condense it down.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about the children in the schools that they have, do you think this is where a lot of the numbers and recruitment come from? Are we looking at second, third generation ISUPK members now?
I think now you're going to see a lot of generational membership because it's you're only gonna pull so many people off the street, but somebody that never knows anything else, they're not really going to question a lot of times. I mean, there are people that were born into cults and leave, obviously, but you're especially with the political climate now, if you're in your formative years and you live in the US and you're raised in this group right now, you're going to see this as your only defense. And I think it's going to galvanize a lot of people's belief in the group. And I think that we are going to start seeing them growing generationally, especially over the next, I'd say 10 years. I think we'll start seeing them grow, not necessarily exponentially, but a lot through generational inheritance of belief.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting in the generational sense, because if you look at the Unification Church, who, you know, they have second generation Moonies now. And I know that's not how members of the Unification Church like to be addressed, but ex-members do refer to the Unification Church as Moonies. So that's why I kind of use that terminology. But it's interesting that within the Unification Church, there are all different levels of financial, there are people of all different levels of financial income within the Unification Church. So, you know, there are very, very, very well-off rich members, and then there are poorer members who spend their time traveling around and selling merchandise to raise money for the Unification Church, like selling flowers on the streets and whatnot. And it's interesting that when you talk about the generations within the ISUPK, if we are talking about generally minority groups within America, statistically they do live in poorer areas as well. So if somebody was to leave the Unification Church, they might have been encouraged to go to university and to get a degree and to be able to get a well-paying job that then gives them the means to be able to move out of the family home that are all still members of the Unification Church, and, you know, find worldly friends to move into an apartment with or a house with, or find a partner outside of the church to move in with, or live independently. Whereas some people inside of these minority groups that are living in, you know, the poorer economically, well, in the less economic friendly parts of America, are going to find it more difficult to leave these groups. And that's where the generations are going to be stuck. It might be difficult for people that live in these particular areas and for these demographics to say, actually, this isn't for me. I want to go, you know, spread my wings and see other things and do other things and meet other people. So how do you break that chain then of generational members of the ISUPK?
It's a hard thing to break, especially in America, because we like to tout that we are all racially equal in America. We have equal opportunity. Looking at the numbers, that's flatly not true. And we have to make that belief true. That's step one. It's just, from the limited training I have in psychology and sociology and anthropology, you're never going to totally eradicate racism. It's simply not possible. But it can be taught that it is an impulse you have that can be controlled and recognized. But we don't, until America changes how we deal with race relations, I don't see a break in the cycle.
No.
And it's kind of, as far as the communities a lot of these members are coming from, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of oppression, not necessarily through any fault of their own, but just because of the way America's set up.
Yeah.
If you're only dealing with people outside of your church in an economic sense, which is what they aim for, you're never going to see that wider world, and you're never going to recognize the viability of other options. So it becomes somewhat of a snake that eats its own tail. But the question is the snake going to grow bigger because it's eating its own tail, or is it finally going to kill itself? And as of now, it looks like it's getting bigger.
And when you spoke before about the different programs other than the schools that the Isupk are running, and we spoke briefly about the prison recruitment that they have and the prison outreach.
Right.
There's a section on that in your report that I found particularly interesting, because my initial thoughts around the prison outreach go back to what we've just spoken about, with minorities feeling as though, especially if they're repeat offenders, that maybe they don't know which direction their life is supposed to be going in, and they don't feel like they have a place of acceptance, or they know which direction to go in their lives. They're kind of just, being released on probation, breaking probation, going back in, which is a cycle of repetition that happens not just in America, but, all over the Western world. I'm not particularly familiar with how the penal system works in other parts of the world, but I do know that in the Western world, repeat offenders are a very common thing. And those particular people are easily influenced or easily preyed upon in terms of indoctrination into these types of movements. So that's where my train of thought went with the prison outreach, but your report focused on something slightly different.
How do you mean?
It talked about the dangers of recruitment inside prisons if they're not vetting particularly the types of people and characters that they are bringing into the fold.
Right. And everything you said is extremely valid and probably more pertinent to the truth than what's in the report. But it is hard for me to ignore the fact that there are people that are just violent.
Yeah.
Known people like that. I've, been out on assignment with people like that. But if you're not vetting those people out, it becomes possible that you can have an extremely violent vein running through your group. And that's not to say that these people are going to fly out the handle and do something horrible, but it is, from an extremist point of view, extremely concerning that if you have somebody that's in jail for felony assault or attempted murder,
Mm-hmm.
that person may not flinch if, if they've been indoctrinated into this group, they won't necessarily flinch if they're told to go carry out violence in the name of the group.
Yeah.
And it kind of comes back to somewhere between what we were both saying, where they are unfortunately very easily preyed upon and extremely easy to influence, and don't shy away from using violence when they deem it to be necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just because somebody is a repeat offender, I mean, it could be misdemeanor drug offences or breaking and entering, and I'm not trying to downplay those crimes in any way whatsoever, but the repeat offenders could also be those that are predispositioned to carrying out things, like bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, assault, sexual offences, especially in such a patriarchal, almost oppressive movement. It's difficult to say what types of people they might be finding in prison, but it's also unfair of us to say that those repeat offenders might not find reasons to stop getting involved with crime if they did get involved with this movement, because obviously we're outside and we're not a part of it, so it's difficult to know. But from the outside, I think it's definitely a very important thing to consider. Absolutely. If they are doing so much prison outreach, what types of people are they bringing into the movement, especially if they're mixing the children and all of the ages and genders within their schools and their law sessions.
Right. I want to believe that they're coming from a pure place of heart doing prison outreach. I want to believe that they want to help these people and stop them from repeat offense. But logically, looking at everything else they do, I can't confidently say that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it is coming from a place not where they're trying to recruit people that are less inclined to do violence, but I think it's more about just widening their reach and growing their community. I think that's probably 99% of the prison outreach program.
I mean, unfortunately, the truth of it is that in America, being a person of color or Hispanic, you might not actually be a minority once you're inside the prison system, which is a horrible statistic to think about, really. Yeah. But you are still part of the wider minority, being a person inside the judicial system. So if you're looking for a place of belonging, if you're looking for a place that you identify with, and you have these visitors coming to the prison to do outreach, and they're telling you that they have a place for you, they have a home for you, they have like-minded people, they can protect you from the end times, they can protect you from doomsday, they are superior in every single way. That would be appealing to somebody who is stuck inside a cell all day and probably feels lonely and might be in a prison that is miles and miles from friends and family who don't even have the means to come and visit, and when they do, maybe it's 6 months to a year because they can't manage the trip so often. Right.
And with COVID now, it's at least
absolutely yeah.
All visitation in non-essential services have been shut down to all correctional facilities in the state until at least the 1st of January.
Yeah, and if you're inside prison and you're not getting all of the facts and you're not being given all the information, all you know is that there's a pandemic on the outside and nobody can visit, and this movement itself has a lot of prophecies around doomsday and the end of the world, and you have one or two people inside the prison with you that say, join us for protection from the apocalypse. I can see why it would be appealing to people on many different levels.
Right.
And it's not just the prison outreach as well. You mentioned something in your report about food distribution and funeral services.
So the funerary services, I believe, are only for members. As best I can tell, that's the case. And as far as the community outreach, they have a food distribution program they do to neighborhoods in need. It doesn't seem that they discriminate against non-members during the food distribution events, but it kind of goes back to the same thing with the prison outreach, where it's in what's called love bonding with a lot of other groups, where it's like, look at all these kind things we're doing for you. Wouldn't it be nice to have this all the time?
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? I kind of like the high five, but if you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. At ChumbaCasino.com, choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void were prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
So I think that it's not out of the goodness of their hearts. It's another recruiting effort, in my opinion.
Right, okay. And just going back on a comment that you made previously as well about hoping that the movement is coming from a pure place of heart. I mean, it's nice to have that outlook and that hope, but the group itself at its core is very anti-Semitic, and that must be difficult for you being a person that is Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Is it almost as if like you're, everything you've learned and everything that you were taught growing up and everything that you practiced in your faith is just being sort of disregarded, ridiculed?
It is, in a sense, if I stop and dwell on it, which is not something I often do, because the cold truth of being Jewish, especially in America, is 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to find a reason to disagree with you or hate you. And that's not to say that everybody's racist or everybody's anti-Semitic, but it's a vein that runs through a lot of not necessarily fringe groups, but more extreme groups in the U.S. Between the banker jokes and thieving and everything, and running the world even now. That one's kind of gotten rise during my lifetime. So if I stop and reflect on it, it bothers me. But I don't stop and reflect on it. I just keep moving forward as much as I can, because being Jewish is part of my identity. It's something I am, but it's not who I am. It's not what I do. So I just try to keep moving forward as much as I can.
Do you think that kind of neutral, almost positive outlook on that comes from Jewish people having a history of persecution anyway?
I think that it probably is rooted in that, and I think a lot of it is probably just how you deal with problems personally. Because I've known people that were Jewish through my life that did not approach the world the same way. They would let these things bother them, and my biggest thing was, I don't understand how they had the energy to stay upset so much. So that's kind of where I'm at with all that kind of stuff, is I don't have the energy to be mad at all the things that want me to be mad at them. So I just choose not to be a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a very good outlook to have. It seems to be it'd be much less exhausting to have if everybody had that sort of outlook, wouldn't it? Everybody would be able to take a nice deep breath, I think, and just like sort of live more in the moment instead of worrying about everything else that's going on. But we spoke briefly about questions that you had for the ISUPK, things that you wanted to clarify, where the lines were blurred and you were kind of left to speculate whether it was A or B, from some of the things that you had been researching. And it's my understanding that you were due to actually interview with somebody who was quite high up in the ranks of this movement.
Right. I was going to interview one of the members of the Nashville School. He is a higher ranking officer in the group. And so we had a date set to do the interview, and he never called to cancel the interview himself. He always had somebody else call to do it.
Right. So did you approach this person and just say, hey, would you like to chat? Did you give him sort of what you were hoping to look into? And then you mentioned a list of pre-approved questions as well.
Yeah, I gave him a list of pre-screened questions for him and his leaders to approve or disapprove, and I said I was perfectly happy to modify or change any of the questions just to get my foot in the door.
Yep.
Because this is one of those groups, they don't do interviews. It's the most expansive thing I've found is Vice had a series, actually it was Vice UK had a series called Hate Thy Neighbor. And they had an episode on the Isupk. And that's probably the most extensive piece of independent media I've been able to find.
Yeah, I mean, Vice have such a huge platform as well.
Right.
So if that's the only piece that you were able to find, it's surprising that they responded to you at all.
Yeah, and it was one of those things. I knew they were watching my social media, and I knew they were watching the website to see what kind of pops up.
Yeah.
But I also did not pull any punches, and I did not slow down or change anything that would jeopardize me losing this interview, because that's just not who I am.
Right. Yeah. So you rearranged a number of times.
Right. And we changed the interview date. I think it was 6 times that I let them reschedule.
Yep.
And finally, I called to confirm on the last day, and they said that it was going to have to be suspended indefinitely. And I knew what that meant. And so I said, okay, this was your chance to set the record straight, and I'm going to have to go to print.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the conclusion for your report, are you gonna launch this on your website?
I am going to launch it on the website. By the time this airs, it'll have been posted.
Fantastic. Good. That means that if people want to look at it first, they'll get no spoilers here.
Yeah. So it'll be available for the wider world. Any claims I've made can be backed up with documentation that I'm more than happy to supply.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more. Honestly, I feel like this report kind of left everything half done. It kind of sits with me wrong that I have not sat down with either a member or former member. So if somebody hears this and wants to reach out, I will listen. I'm more than happy to talk to you and approach this neutrally, despite everything I've said here to the contrary.
Yeah, but I mean, if somebody was willing to reach out and have that conversation with you, it would stop the speculating that we have done in this episode. You know, it would clarify and give clear answers to those things that we're just alleging at this moment, because we don't know.
Because that's really what it comes down to, is somebody could come out of the woodwork, and honestly, I kind of hope they do, and say that every speculation you've made is wrong. Everything that you've implied is wrong. I hope that person's out there, and I hope that person talks to me. One of the things, I don't know if you saw it on the website, I have an open letter to people of extreme beliefs. I am more than happy to sit down and listen to you, because the concept of hate fascinates me. I don't understand it. I would love to hear people's take on it. So
hopefully by the time this episode comes out, you'll be able to find Joe's report and many of the other in-depth articles that he's released on his own website that he is, quote, the owner of, at tnindependent.com, which is for Tennessee Independent. So I do recommend going and having a look. It's very not chic. I'm not sure what the word is. The website's very clean.
It's very minimalist.
Yes, and I like it. It's very user friendly.
Yeah, that's the aim. I'm a lazy web designer, and it kind of pays off sometimes.
Yeah, it's. I've recently covered a cult called Love Has Won. They actually just appeared on the Dr. Phil show this week, so that was quite interesting. But their website is just different fonts and colors and pop art, and things are moving and there's animations everywhere. And I was trying to do some research on the group itself, and I was starting to think that the website was laid out like that on purpose, purely so I couldn't get the information that I wanted. And then it's refreshing to go on websites like yours that just says, bam, 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 here are my articles, here's what type of article it is. So I really appreciated that. So yeah, for anybody that wants to go and have a look at Joe's work, I really do recommend it. It's tnindependent.com. So are you a journalist by trade? Is that what you do in your day job?
Effectively, yes. I'm a journalism school dropout.
Right.
Because after about the first year of journalism school, there's not really a whole lot beyond ethics that you need, especially in the modern era.
Right.
And I don't want to call it a 9-to-5 job, because it's not.
No, definitely not. I mean, I'm sitting here at 9 o'clock at night having this conversation, so it's definitely not.
Another source of income, so because my family does like to eat, and I find it very annoying, but they do. So it is something I do full time, but it's not my only source of income.
Right.
So that's kind of, if you look at the dates on the website, it's kind of sporadic.
Yeah.
And the dates on the things I publish to other outlets are kind of sporadic.
Right.
So I do it as much as I can. I'll say that.
And it's obviously something that you enjoy if you've stuck with this project since, last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all the points that I've got, Joe. I don't know if there's anything you think we've missed out or anything you think we should cover.
Well, we briefly touched on how they treat new members. I think that we should probably go into a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've thrown the word cult around a lot in this episode, and I know that you've said that you steered away from that and looked more at the extremist side of things in regards to this movement. But if there were any particular examples of things that you could give listeners that do reflect cult-like behavior, that would be awesome.
Sure. So the social control aspect of it, which I know you're a big fan of Stephen Hassan's bite model.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this would be a whole social control construct that they have. When you come into the school for the first 6 months, you're not allowed to interact with other members outside of the school while you quote unquote shed your old life.
Right. So you're almost quarantined.
Yeah, you're effectively socially quarantined.
Right.
And after that 6-month period, other members can approach and speak to you. And this is how it seems to be how a lot of their romantic relationships are done. And from there, you can have a 6-month courtship. And from there, you have to get either a priest or some other leader's approval to marry. So all marriages are controlled by the whims of the people in charge of your school.
Okay, so it's like a matchmaking service as well.
Sort of. But what concerns me about something like that is, well, first of all, how completely strange it is, and being at the whims of the leader to say whether or not you can be with somebody. That's just textbook relationship and social control.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if the other side of that is not if you can be with somebody, but this is the person that you will be with. Right.
Because it's you can't. I don't believe that you can separate those two things out. Where the person in charge is going to say yes, you can marry this person. You're not going to be able to separate that ability from you're not going to marry this person, you're going to marry this person. And so it's, again, I'd like to believe they have the purest intents, but I don't think they do.
So that's just the initiation sort of integration into the movement.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how they would do that for new recruits in the prison system. Maybe
you can't really isolate out. because that's tough to say. It might be one
Yeah.
of the things where you have to do the social isolation after you get out.
Yeah, maybe it's upon release that they have that sort of initiation process. But do you know, just off the top of your head, if there are any restrictions in terms of eating, drinking, smoking, that sort of
Yes.
thing?
Yes. All drugs are banned recreationally, no marijuana, anything else. They do seem to keep strict kosher.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Right.
Like an Orthodox Jew level of kosher. And so no shellfish, no pork, no cheeseburgers, because you can't mix beef and dairy.
Right. Yep.
That kind of stuff. So there is dietary restrictions, which for me are not out of the norm necessarily. For a lot of people, they would be considered out of the norm. And then going from there, that's just kind of one element, and I think that's where they kind of get the thing. They're Israelites, so they have to follow the Ten Commandments, follow the Book of Judges as far as those laws go.
Right.
So how strictly that kind of stuff is observed is pretty debatable. I don't think that they're going to shy away from a polyester blend t-shirt.
Yep.
But they're also not going to go out and have a BLT.
Okay. Yeah. What about things like clothing as well? I mean, obviously, in the way you've spoken about the patriarchy within the system, I'm guessing that there is a type of way the women are supposed to dress.
They believe in fairly conservative dress for both genders. But one thing they preach is kind of always be ready for battle, especially for the men. So
Okay.
you're not going to see them wearing, dress shoes. They're always going to be wearing functional footwear. A lot of times they wear graphic t-shirts, they wear head wraps, stuff like that. And it's all relatively militaristic looking.
Right.
A lot of spikes, a lot of leather, things like that. Different kind of militaristic slogans and stuff. And so you'll see that a lot of times. I actually, send you one that I found rather interesting.
Yeah, that would be good to put up on maybe the social media pages so that people can kind of anticipate what we're going to be speaking about. And what about things like the camp or the schools? Do they have long services at all where people might be subjected to sleep deprivation?
I don't think that there's necessarily sleep deprivation going on. But there are long services. Like I sent you the link to the Southern Region Camp, which is 5 days, it looks like, by the time it's all said and done. And so it's a long thing, but the way it's scheduled out, I think that there's probably not sleep deprivation in that instance, but I can't discount it either.
Right. I mean, just from what we've spoken about, the word cult definitely applies in terms of the biblical sense, because any practicing mainstream Christian is going to say that anybody that doesn't fit within mainstream Christianity or Judaism or Catholicism, even though I'm sure they all class each other as cults as well, is going to be labelled a cult. So Isupk in itself, because of its beliefs and values are so different to mainstream religion, it's going to be classed as a sect or a new religious movement or a cult anyway. And the way that we're referring to a cult in terms of behavior control, emotional control, thought control, some of the things that you've touched upon definitely do link to that. And the treatment of women, even if it was in a cultural sense, to me sounds very much like cult behavior.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in this movement myself, and I'm sure if you've spent a year doing this research and this is what you've managed to ascertain, I don't know if anybody would be able to go out and do any more independent research.
There's always room for more independent research, in my opinion. I kind of would like to see somebody drill more into the cult side of it, as far as religious practices go, because that's not necessarily my area of expertise. So I'd like to see somebody that has more expertise in that area drill into it, such as yourself.
Yeah.
It's because it's kind of the way I look at things is, when is somebody going to set off a bomb? And
right. Yeah.
I look at external views as opposed to internal. In a lot of ways, it's not necessarily fair to look at this group and only be concerned about their external threat, because there's very much an internal threat as well to the people that are trapped inside this movement. Because it's, you said on your show, I don't know how many times, if you or somebody you know is trapped in one of these groups, there are resources to help.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that the lasting damage they do may be more to their own members than externally.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Any group with a doomsday prophecy, I think, has the potential to be extremely dangerous, especially movements like this one or the For Unification Church now, who are encouraged to bear arms, who are encouraged to almost keep weapons caches. And, there's that external threat for us on the outside, but then obviously internally, as we've spoken, it sounds like there's almost arranged marriages or forced relationships. There's the clear abuse of power towards women who are openly subjugated and labeled as possessions instead of human beings, and who are encouraged to do, the menial housework and making the clothes and things like that. So it's a very difficult one, and it's definitely a frustrating one. Even just the account of the way that the kid was spoken to about the lynching, and that's on camera, so you don't know what else could be happening within the movement. But at the same time, we don't really know. I wish they would have sat down and spoken with you. I know that's probably something that you wish for even more.
Oh yeah, I mean, but it's I didn't necessarily expect them to follow through with their agreeing to do the interview, but man, I was hoping they would.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, yeah. So that's all the points that I've got to raise. I mean, if there's anything else that you think we've missed, I think we should probably go over. But if not, then that's everything.
I think we're good. The only other thing I have is, don't be a jerk, and the world will be a better place.
Absolutely, yeah. I think more people need that mentality, as I mentioned before, just to kind of have that, like, well, it is what it is, and we can only try and do better. So I really appreciate that, and I really do appreciate the work that you've done here. I know you said that you being an independent journalist isn't something that you primarily do, but I think it's important to allow these platforms for people to educate themselves if they wish to do so. I mean, both of us put our necks on the line by covering these types of topics, and either of our platforms have the potential to be attacked in retaliation to our attacking. So it's difficult to say, but I think it's commendable that you're out here doing this work and doing this research and putting these reports together. So I really highly recommend anybody who is interested in finding out more about Joe's work to go to tnindependent.com, as we mentioned before. And yeah, just thank you very much for your time, Joe. And thank you for sending me the report and allowing me to be part of this journey that you've been on.
I appreciate you having me on, and I hope all the best for your podcast. And I'm going to keep listening. I've listened to every episode so far. So.
Have you really? That's amazing. That's amazing. Have you had any favorites?
What was it? I think the Unification Church is probably going to be my favorite so far. Or Love Is One, the one that just came out.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting
one. That was an interesting episode for sure. Because I'd kind of seen them floating around online over the years, and I never really put much stock into it. And I didn't realize the depth that they were into. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that Love Has Won, I think, on paper, has less members than the ISUPK, and yet Dr. Phil is happy to sit down and have a chat with the leader of that movement. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe one day there'll be a conversation between them two, or likewise on another platform, General Johanna and somebody of Dr. Phil's sort of profile. Who knows? We can only hope, because it's definitely piqued my interest and I'd love to know more. But hopefully we'll have to see what the future holds. But thank you so much, Joe. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
This is where we are going to leave today's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by emailing me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or following me at cultvaultpod on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.